Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we are doing a deck tech for Ketramose, the New Dawn. Ketramose is a 3-mana 4/4 with Menace, Lifelink, and Indestructible. He can't attack or block unless there are 7 or more cards in exile, and then whenever 1 or more cards are put into exile from graveyards and or the battlefield during your turn, you draw a card and you lose a life. So this is Orzhov Exile Blink. So why play Ketramose? Because he's a 3-mana value engine from your command zone. Just passively, constantly on your turn, you're just drawing multiple cards and losing a couple life. That's really good. He's got great keywords such as Menace, Lifelink, and Indestructible. Indestructible is obviously the best one. Like, he's just harder to kill, so it's like he's really not going much of anywhere. Menace and Lifelink are just better just to when he is up online as a creature and attacking. I mean, he's a creature always, but you know what I mean. Menace and Lifelink are great to get through. He's hard to block. He's not going to die to combat damage anyway, so you just gain 4 life to kind of replenish some of the life you lost. And I really like him just because he is a unique build for a commander. Like, he's a great way to progress our board state and to give us more options with card draw. Like, just constantly, multiple times during our turn. Like, we're probably drawing like 5 cards like every single turn, or I guess during our own turn. And another thing is all of our exile stuff replaces itself. So if we just do one thing, like let's say like a Swords to Plowshare, it's like we kill, I guess we'd have to do it sorcery speed, but still, right? We get rid of something during our turn, we draw a card to replace it. That's kind of the idea. Here's the game plan. We need him to win. This deck does not function without him. I've looked at a couple other options, and I think this is the best one. At the end of the day, it's just kind of a bad blink pile without him. Like, you kind of get the blink from white and the removal from black, but it's just kind of not enough to win without him. Like, you need that constant card draw to make it happen. Early game, we want to get down small exile pieces. These are like 1 mana or 2 mana pieces that will just start exiling stuff. And mid game, we want to play Ketramose and start drawing. Later game, we want to start casually draining out our opponents, keep their board states clean with our enter the battlefield abilities that get rid of stuff, and drain with our enter the battlefield abilities that make our opponents lose life or gain us life. And that's kind of how we win. So going into channel and deck stuff, the deck is 340 at the making of the video. A lot of that's going to go down, right? Like, Ketramose is selling right now for like $25. He's not a $25 card, so a lot of the cards you see will just go down a lot. Get the cards you need from the link down below, and as always, remember to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Going into it, we only have one Planeswalker. It is the Eternal Wanderer. No more than one creature can attack her each combat, which is really nice. The idea is we just have an extra blink engine, right? White has a good amount of blink, but it really needs to be supplemented typically by blue or something else. So having black is a bit awkward. So we have cards like the Eternal Wanderer that blink something on our end step, or blink something and then return to our end step, which is really good. We can also passively just make a 2/2 with double strike, which is a great blocker for her, or we can just -4 her. Probably just pick Ketramose, and then each player sacrifices all of the creatures that we don't choose. So at best, we always keep Ketramose, and it's kind of a board wipe, and then we just start blinking things more and more. Going into creatures, Abdel Arian Gorian's Ward. When he enters the battlefield, exile any number of other non-land permanents you control until he leaves the battlefield. Create a 1/1 white soldier creature token for each permanent exiled this way. So the idea for him is we play him, exile our board, we make a bunch of 1/1s, and then we blink him, we get all our stuff back, and then we can just keep kind of doing it over and over again, making a ton of 1/1s. Abyssal Harvester, we can exile target creature card from a graveyard that was put there this turn, create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a nightmare, and then exile all nightmare tokens we control. He's really good, like, if we kill something during our turn, or if, like, someone mills something during our turn, or if they sack something, or whatever, we can just kind of tap him, give him a little yoink. Or it's also great during not our turn and during combat. So we only draw cards during our turn with Ketramose. We only draw cards during our turn. So if someone else has a creature that dies, we can just kind of exile it and give a little bit of a yoink, because we want to keep graveyards clean. Aerial Extortionist is super good. 4/3 flyer, and when it enters or deals combat damage to a player, for each, exile up to 1 target non-land permanent, and then for as long as that card remains exiled, its owner may cast it. And then whenever a player casts a spell from anywhere other than their hand, draw a card. So we can either exile our own stuff and then like a cheap costed thing, and then cast it again, draw a card with Ketramose from the exile, and then we can pay a little bit, cast it, and then draw an extra card. really draw 2 cards from that, or we can just start exiling our opponent's things. And just kind of having them off the field and then just like rinsing and repeating, dealing combat damage because it is a 4/3 with evasion. Charming Prince is just kind of a little bit of everything, right? Early game, we could probably scry 2, set up our draw, gain 3 life if we're early in a pinch, but just kind of when he enters, exile another target creature and then return it to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. He's like the kind of card where you kind of just start chaining blinks together, where there's a lot of cards that say, oh yeah, when it enters, return something at the end step. So you just kind of get like a blink chain going, and he's kind of good at that. Circuit Mender, when it enters, gain 2. When it leaves, draw a card. Prime for blinking. Dalek Drone is really good because when he enters, we destroy target creature and opponent controls and they lose 3 life. So these are kind of the cards you see that like Charming Prince is more on the exile like plan and draw cards with Ketramose, where Circuit Mender and Dalek Drone are more on the blink game plan, where it's like we still have to have good blink effects and not just exile stuff. Dothry Voidwalker, he has Shadow, which basically means he's unblockable unless your opponent has a Dothry Voidwalker. If a card would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, instead exile it with a Void counter on it. And then we can sacrifice him and then just basically play one of those cards exiled with the Void counter for free. So really good. It's just really good. We just get to cast something for free. It kind of hates on our opponent's graves. And he's unblockable. Distinguished Conjurer, whenever another creature enters the battlefield under our control, we gain a life, and then we can pay 5 and tap it to exile another creature, and we just blink it, right? Distinguished Conjurer is really good in this deck, 1, because it's a blink engine, and 2, because we have a couple, same thing with Ilyasal Core, just kind of, because Ketramose makes us lose so much life, like whenever something gets exiled, basically, we lose a life and draw a card. We kind of have to have the offset ability of gaining life passively, right? So if we blink something, like we lose a life from Ketramose and draw a card, but then we're also going to gain something, a life back with Distinguished Conjurer and Ilyasal Core. Ilyasal Core is great, has a whole thing, Death Touch, whenever another creature enters under our control, we gain a life, and then whenever a creature in opponent control dies, whenever one of our creatures die, each opponent loses 1 life. So really there for the ETB. The death is also just a little added benefit to him. And he has Death Touch. He's like kind of an annoying blocker. Eldrazi Displacer just to blink another creature. Pay 3 mana, exile something. The colorless is a bit awkward. We have a couple mana rocks to help prevent that, but still really good when it gets going. Emperor of Bones, at the beginning of combat on your turn, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. So we have a lot of these kind of effects, right? That just sorcery speed basically on our turn, exile something for free, and then we draw a card with Ketramose. So we have a lot of them. We can pay 2 to adapt 2, and then whenever 1 or more counters are put on them, put a creature exiled with him onto the battlefield under our control with a finality counter. It gets haste, and then we sack it at the beginning of the next end step. So we get a little steal. Feldar Guardian. Oh my god, Sovereign Guardian. When he enters, exile another target permanent you control, and then return that card to the battlefield. So basically, whenever he enters, blink. We can get like a lot of good blink chains going on. If we can make a copy of him, we get infinite blinks, which is also kind of fun, but that would also kill us. Flicker Wisp, when it enters the battlefield, exile another target permanent just that anyone controls, and then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. Always really good. Again, we just start getting things back at the beginning of our end step. And then also, what I like to do with Flicker Wisp is hit opponents' bounce lands. So it just kind of like makes them return a land back to their hand. I always think it's like silly. Gilrayan, however you pronounce it, Duindain Protector. Pay 2 mana, tap it, blink a creature, right? And then we can have it come back right away, or we can have it come back at the next end step with a Vigilance and a lifelink counter. Doesn't really matter. It's just kind of 2 mana, tap it, and blink. That's kind of what we want. Gary is the big one. Gary is mainly one of our big win conditions. When he enters, each opponent loses X life, and we gain X life, where equal to our devotion, each opponent loses X life, where X is our devotion of black, and then we gain life equal to that. At the very worst, it's 2. So at the very worst, he enters the battlefield, and each opponent, assuming we have 3 opponents and a pot of 4, each opponent loses 2 life, and we gain 6. Ideally, we can link Gary a lot to beat out opponents, and if assuming we have more than just 3 black or 2 black pips, it can go a lot quicker. Graveyard Trespasser has Ward discard a card, and whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. If it's a creature, each opponent loses 1 life, and we gain 1 life. The idea, and its flip side, is basically the same exact thing, but it's exile 2 cards from graveyards, and then 1 life for each creature. So it's basically just doubles up Graveyard Trespasser. The thing I like about this is we have Ketramose, and then we have Graveyard Trespasser, and then we attack, and then we exile a card from a graveyard, um, and then we lose a life and draw a card. But Graveyard Trespasser just kind of offsets that little life loss, and it drains everyone else, so which is really nice. Helpful Hunter, short, sweet, to the point. When it enters, draw. Easy, easy. We blink, we draw. Combo Console of Allocation. He's just kind of there of a hate piece and also there to help recuperate all of our life to make sure that we're not like dying to Ketramose. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature, they lose 2 life and we gain 2 life. It's good. Knight of the White Orchid is really good just because it helps us stay consistent on lands. When he enters the battlefield, if an opponent has more lands than us, search your deck for a Plains card, put it onto the battlefield. Easy, just ramp. Lion Sash is really, I just like the idea of Lion Sash. Paying 1 white to exile target card from a graveyard and then putting a counter on it sometimes if it's a permanent is really, really good because you can functionally read that as pay a white mana, draw a card, lose a life. Like, at the very worst, it's that. Lauren of the Third Path. When it enters, pop an artifact or enchantment. You and target opponent each draw a card. It's just really more on the blink plan of just we can just start blowing up our opponent's artifacts or enchantments. Obsidat Ghost Council, those spooky dudes, when they enter the battlefield, target opponent loses 2 life and we gain 2 life. And then at the beginning of our end step, we may exile it. If we do, return it to the battlefield at the beginning of our next upkeep. So, and it gains haste, which is really nice. I just like the idea of it entering, each opponent loses 2, or target opponent loses 2, we gain 2, and then it exile itself, we draw a card from Ketramose, and then it comes right back. So it's just kind of like always there. It's like a perpetuating engine that just kind of is itself. Philia Exuberant Shepherd, Flash. When it attacks, exile up to 1 target non-land permanent. At the beginning of the next end step, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control, and if it entered under our control, put a 1/1 counter on Philia. Philia is a great blink engine. It's just whenever blinking her, I guess we can't, one other, it's really just to start blinking our stuff. Worst case scenario, our opponent has a creature, we can always just blink it and get it out of the way and just swing in for a little block, or Philia blinks one of our things and she gets a little bit stronger. Preston the Vanisher. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under our control, if it wasn't cast, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's an illusion, and then we can pay 2 and sack 5 illusions to exile a non-land permanent. He's really good because we have a lot of ETBs, and most of our non-token creatures do have ETBs, so it kind of doubles up and does a lot of stuff, and really could go infinite. Even like an easy example is Ravenous Chupacabra. When he enters the battlefield, destroy target creature and opponent controls, which is really good for blink, but if Preston's on the field, Chupacabra enters, we get rid of a creature, we make a 0/1 token copy of Chupacabra, destroy another creature. It's just really good. And then Resto Angel can kind of go a little bit silly, which is really nice. So let's say, for example, we have Preston and Ravenous Chupacabra on the field, and Resto Angel enters, and we exile target Chupacabra because it's not an angel, and then we return it to the battlefield. So now we get 2 Restoration Angel triggers, so we could hit something else that's not a Chupacabra, and now we have 2 Chupacabra entering because the non-token enters, and then we make a token that's a copy of it, and that enters, which is really, really nice. Sheoldred the Apocalypse. Whenever we draw a card, we gain 2 life. Whenever an opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life. It's really good just to help us also offset the life loss. Like, the life loss from Ketramose is really scary. Like, when we're doing that multiple times a turn, and like you'll see when we get especially into the artifacts, how often we can do it. We want to make sure that we're just not killing ourselves. So drawing a lot of cards, what we do is great, and we don't want to die doing it. Skyclave Apparition enters the battlefield, exile something we don't like. They can have a token that's a whatever, like XX token that's at most a 4/4. We just keep doing it over and over. Solemn Simulacrum. We don't have a ton of ramp options in Orzhov. We just don't. But he's a really, really good blink piece. So whenever he enters, search your deck for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then if he does die somehow, we draw a card. So it's not really lost, but he's really good just blinking him over and ramping every turn. Solitude, super sick, enters the battlefield. It is a Swords to Plowshares ability. So the way I like this card, right, is it enters the battlefield on our turn, exile up to 1 target exile a creature, they gain life. We exile a creature, we lose 1 life to Ketramose, and then we draw a card, and then we blink it later on, and then it exiles itself again, and then it comes back. So we exiles with a blink, draw an extra card, comes back down, exile another thing an opponent controls, draw an extra card, a lot of card draw. Soul's Attendant and Soul Warden are the exact same card. It's just whenever another creature comes into play, we gain 1 life. It's not like under our control, it's just anyone's field whenever another creature enters, we just gain a life, which is really, really good to help offset the life loss we get from Ketramose. Sun Titan is super sick because we have a lot of very low CMC cost creatures, so being able to reanimate them every turn is very nice. Wall of Omens just draws us a lot of cards, and it's also a really good blocker. Witch Enchanter is a land on the other side, but when she does enter, we can pop an artifact or enchantment, and again, we just keep linking. It's a land when we need it, it's a creature when we don't need the land. We only have 1 sorcery, and it's Farewell, which is funny enough because we do a lot of stuff during our turn, but I just kind of wanted to make sure we have 1 board wipe, to kind of make sure, like, it's an out, right? It's just an out. And in Exiles, we at least draw some cards, even if Ketramose dies going that way. Going into instance, we have a good amount of instance for a sorcery speed deck, I guess. Exile target non-land permanent. You may cast that card for as long as it remains exiled, and you may spend colorless mana as though it were mana of any color to cast that spell. It's really good just because well, one, again, all of the cards you see that say exile, just assume we just draw an extra card, right? So now you read it as like exile target non-land permanent, draw a card, and then we can cast that exiled permanent for any mana, right? Anguished Unmaking, exile target non-land, draw a card, lose 4 life. Cloud Shift, blink a creature, draw a card. You guys know what I'm saying, right? Cloud Shift is great just to re-trigger some of our ETB abilities. Deadly Rollick, I really like it. I couldn't help but put it in. As long as we have Ketramose, which ideally we always will, and especially we should because he's indestructible, we can cast it for free, and then we exile target creature. So not only is it a free exile spell, but it also draws us a card. Eerie Interlude exiles any number of creatures we control. Return those cards to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. Will re-trigger all of our ETB abilities. It's awkward because it's an instant, right? So if someone wipes the board, we can at least dodge it, or we can do it during our own turn and just kind of re-trigger everything, draw a card off of it, and then have all of our ETBs happen again. Ephemerate, just kind of a better Cloud. It's literally Cloud Shift, but with Rebound, which lets us do it again for free next turn. So really, really good. Lae'zel's Acrobatics, which I don't feel like she's very acrobatic in the game, but not the point, right? Exile all non-token creatures you control, then roll a d20. Return those cards to the battlefield under their... basically return them at the beginning of the next end step, or return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control, and then do it again. So it's an Eerie Interlude, or it's 2 Eerie Interludes. It's a 50-50 shot, really. Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares are functionally the same in this deck. Get rid of a creature. They can either get a basic, or they can gain a couple life. Either way, we're getting rid of a creature for 1 mana, and we are drawing a card off of it. Going into artifacts, Agatha's Soul Cauldron is a really good example of how we're going to be drawing a lot of cards every turn. You may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to activate ability of creatures you control. Really, really good. Creatures you control with 1/1 counters on them have all activated abilities of creature cards exiled with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. And then we can tap it, exile target card from a graveyard, and when a creature card is exiled this way, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. Whew. So really, really good. This is the idea of like we have a lot of artifacts that tap or just pay an ability or whatever, right? And just exile a card from a grave. That's it. Just exile a card from a grave. That's going to trigger on our turn Ketramose to draw us cards. Arcane Signet. We don't have a ton of ramp options. It's good. It's just a good Signet. Bolas's Citadel, I can't really help but run in a lot of my decks. I think it's so good. You may look at the top card of your deck anytime. You may play lands and cast spells from the top of your library, and if you cast a spell this way, pay life equal to its mana value rather than pay its mana cost, and then sack 10 non-land permanents to make each opponent lose 10 life. Whew. This card can kind of go really, really nuts in our deck because we have so many of the, like, oh, this creature enters and we gain life or whatever, or any of, like, the bling stuff. Like, so even though we're losing life, we're also still drawing cards, but like we can potentially kill someone in 1 turn, or even everyone in 1 turn with Bolas's Citadel if we just get a bunch of blink spells that just keep hitting like Gary or like whatever, right? Conjurer's Closet, end of our turn, exile a creature, return it to the battlefield. Great, we just blink a creature on the end step and draw a card. Dino DNA, we imprint, pay 1 mana and tap it. Exile target creature cards from a graveyard only as a sorcery, which is still fine because we're kind of doing everything as a sorcery anyways. And then pay 6 mana as a sorcery to create a token that's a copy of target creature exiled with it, except it's a 6/6 with trample, which is really good. So it's good to get like really whatever the best card in our opponent's graveyard is, right? We just pay 1 mana and tap it. So even all in one, we can pay 7 mana, or even late game, right? Even though we have to cast it, pay 8 mana to reanimate a creature for an opponent's graveyard, except it's a 6/6 with trample. Felwar Stone is the same thing as Arcane Signet for all intents and purposes in this deck. Ghost Vacuum, tap it, exile target card from a graveyard, great. And then we can pay 6 and tap it to put all creature cards exiled with it onto the battlefield as a sorcery, and all the creature exiled with it are now 1/1 spirits on our field. It's just really good, right? Again, we tap it, draw a card, lose a life every turn. Orzhov Signet is just ramp. Panharmonicon, if an artifact or creature entering the battlefield would trigger an ability of a permanent, it triggers an additional time, which is really good just because it doubles up all of our ETBs. Relic of Progenitus, basically to draw an extra card every turn, and then we can also double it up if we really need to exile all cards from all graveyards and draw a card. We do have so much Grave Hate in this deck, I don't really think we would ever do that, like, 1 mana ability. I think we're just going to always just tap it every single turn and get rid of something to draw a card. Soul Ring is Soul Ring, Sword of Hearth and Home, protection from green and white, and then whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, exile, basically blink a creature and then search our deck for a basic, put them onto the battlefield, and that's pretty much it. It ramps us, it blinks, it's really good. Ideally, we just put it on a creature that we really don't want to blink, or more of like a utility guy like Ilias Okor or something like that's a good example. Either way, ramp and blinking is good. Talisman of Hierarchy, just another mana rock, and then Unlicensed Hearse is really good. Tap it, exile up to 2 target cards from a single graveyard, which again, draws us a card. And then I like it because the earlier we play it, the better it is. Like late game, like eventually this is just going to be like a 10/10, and we can just start swinging in with that. Going into enchantments, we have Authority of the Consuls to make all of our opponents' creatures enter tapped, and then whenever a creature enters under an opponent's control, we gain a life. So again, just more incremental life gain. Grasp of Fate to exile a bunch of things. We, again, even though we're exiling multiple things, so we're really only drawing 1 card and losing 1 life, but it's an exile spell that hits every other every player except us, every opponent rather. So really good. Smothering Tithe, we don't have a ton of ramp, right? And this is a really good way to make us get a ton of mana. Like if our opponents just keep drawing cards, which is fine, we're kind of like, it just fuels us because we have so many like 1 mana like Cloud Shift or Ephemerate or like Swords to Plowshares or like all of these like 1 mana cards that just ultimately will draw us another card in Cantrip. So it really can help fuel us because we're generally a pretty low costed deck. And then finally, Teleportation Circle is just probably the best card in the deck. At the beginning of your end step, exile up to 1 target artifact or creature. It's just blink. It's just great. It's just, again, at the end of our turn, we blink. Going into lands, we really don't have anything crazy. Bleachbone Verge, really just because it's from the set, it's a brand new card, it's a dual land. A lot of these are just because they're untapped dual lands. Like Caves of Koilos is an untapped dual. It also lets us Eldrazi Displacer. Same thing with like Soul Ring and same thing with Talisman. Like that's kind of how he works. Command Tower, untapped dual. Fetid Teeth is again for Eldrazi Displacer, and it also helps us filter. So if we need black, or white, it's easy to help filter. Godless Shrine is just one of those good cards we can get with like Knight of the White Orchid, so we can just tutor this to the battlefield, or it's an untapped dual. Hive of the Eye Tyrant is funny just because we can pay 4 mana, make it a 3/3, and then when it and with Menace, and then when it attacks, exile a card, which will then draw us a card and lose us a life from Ketramose, which is also just a good little ability. Isolated Chapel is fine, just again another untapped because we have a lot of basics in this deck. I didn't really want to do anything too crazy with the mana base of this deck just because it honestly it doesn't really need it. Like there's not a ton of cards that will really make this, or not a ton of lands that will make this deck crazy. Reliquary Tower, give us no max hand size, colorless mana, Eldrazi Displacer. We got to make sure we have a lot of these to hit that because that guy can go absolutely crazy. Shattered Sanctum almost always enters untapped, and then Vault of Champions should always enter untapped because, again, assuming we're on a pot of 4, we have 3 opponents, and if it does enter tapped, then that means we only have 1 opponent, and at that point in the game, it really just doesn't matter. Going into basics, we have 13 plains and 12 swamps, which gives us like 35, maybe even 36 lands if we include like the MDFCs in the deck. Which is still plenty. And again, we're drawing so many cards, we could probably even go a little bit lower on the mana count. Again, because we're drawing so many cards. That's all I got. Thank you guys for watching. Get the cards you need from the link down below. And as always, remember to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. And I will see you guys next time.